Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the absolute most baffling modern mysteries of our time. On March 8th, 2014, a 300-ton Boeing 777 carrying 239 people simply vanished from the sky. But today, we aren't just looking at the tragedy itself, we're stepping into a gripping, purely data-driven detective story. We're going to explore exactly how investigators used some seriously obscure satellite math and radio waves to hunt down Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370. It's a completely fascinating journey of how science had to step in when traditional tracking completely and utterly failed. Zero. Literally zero. That is exactly how much direct location data was transmitted from the aircraft after it disappeared. In a world where our phones are tracking our every single step, this massive commercial airliner went completely dark. There were no GPS coordinates, no radar blips. Investigators were left with absolute zero. But what makes this story so incredible is that while the main communication was cut, the plane actually left behind these faint, automated electronic footprints. And that faint little whisper of data, that's the only key we have to unlocking this whole mystery. So let's look at the timeline, because the baseline of this mystery starts out entirely routine. At 12:42 a.m., the flight takes off from Kuala Lumpur heading to Beijing. Everything is totally normal. The captain even says good night to air traffic control. But then, at 1:21 a.m., a massive discrepancy happens. Right as it enters Vietnamese airspace, the plane suddenly just vanishes from civilian tracking. Fast forward exactly an hour later to 2:22 a.m., and it pops up on military radar. But the crazy part here is where it was spotted, near the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. That is heading west, which is entirely the wrong way from Beijing. So, where on earth did it go from there? To figure that out, scientists had to pivot big time. They had to rely on a highly obscure form of data to track the missing flight. Which brings us to Section 1, the satellite handshakes. The key to this entire mystery relies on something called a satellite handshake. You see, large airplanes like the Boeing 777 are basically designed to automatically try and establish communication with satellites just to make regular comms easier. It's essentially an electronic request saying, "Hey, I'm here, I want to log in." But, and this is a massive catch, this handshake proves the plane was intact and actually flying, but it does not transmit actual GPS coordinates. The satellite knows the plane exists somewhere, but it has no idea exactly where it is. To put that into perspective, think about how your smartphone automatically searches for a known Wi-Fi network as you walk past your favorite cafe. It's constantly pinging the router in the background without you doing anything. The Boeing 777 was doing exactly the same thing, sending these automated background pings to a satellite high above the Earth, just trying to log in. Now, the plane didn't just try this background handshake once. It actually attempted to connect exactly 7 times over the course of the night. Because the satellite only knew the plane was somewhere in its line of sight during each ping, those 7 handshakes translated into 7 massive, incredibly vague rings of potential location on the map. We're talking 7 gigantic circles where the plane could theoretically be. So how do you find an airplane inside massive circles that span from Kazakhstan all the way down to Australia? You have to narrow it down somehow. Let's move into Section 2, drawing the 7th arc. Investigators managed to narrow it down using 3 absolutely brilliant mathematical steps. First, they measured the exact angle of the satellite's antenna at the exact moment it received the ping. Second, they tracked the precise timing of those 7 connection attempts. And third, they factored in the physics of the plane itself, so its estimated speed and the exact amount of fuel it had left in the tanks. By combining the angle, the time, and the fuel, they could project the farthest possible boundary the plane could have reached by the time of that final 7th ping. And that intense calculation gave us the 7th arc. Honestly, this is the central hero of our data story. The 7th arc is this massive, curved boundary located over the completely uncharted southern Indian Ocean, roughly 2,000 kilometers west of Australia. Based on all the satellite math and those fuel projections, the 7th handshake represents the exact moment and location where the plane's fuel would have run dry, causing it to finally plunge into the ocean. But data only tells us the where, right? It doesn't tell us the why. How does a flight bound for Beijing, China, turn entirely around and end up thousands of kilometers away in the remote southern Indian Ocean? Let's jump to Section 3. Why did it fly south? So, when we filter the leading theories through our new 7th arcs data, a pretty clear picture starts to emerge. First, we have pilot intent. The 180-degree turn was likely manual, and yeah, the captain actually had a similar path on a home flight simulator. So it's possible it aligns with the arc, but investigators noted the guy was a highly respected pilot with absolutely no behavioral or economic motives for suicide. Okay, second theory, hijackers. There were 2 passengers with stolen passports, but Interpol cleared them as migrants just trying to get to Europe, making a hijacking highly unlikely. But the third theory, a catastrophic oxygen deficiency, creates what's called a ghost flight, where the plane just runs on autopilot until it runs out of fuel. And this aligns perfectly with our data, a plane flying a straight, stubborn path south until the engines finally die. So how does this ghost flight scenario actually play out in real life? Well, according to this theory, a sudden technical malfunction or accident happens right as they enter Vietnamese airspace. The crew manually turns the plane 180 degrees to head back to Malaysia for an emergency landing. But tragically, before they can make it, a severe oxygen deficiency causes everyone on board, including the pilots, to faint. The autopilot takes over, the plane eventually turns south over the Indian Ocean and flies completely silently as a ghost flight until the fuel is exhausted perfectly along that 7th arc. Now, knowing the plane crashed somewhere along this huge arc is one thing. Actually finding it in the water is a whole different ballgame. Welcome to Section 4, pinpointing the final location. $160 million. That was the staggering cost of the initial 3-year search effort. It was literally the largest and most expensive search operation in all of aviation history. For years, they scoured the surface and the deep ocean along the 7th arc, and after spending all that money and all that time, they found absolutely nothing. The operation was ultimately called off and just deemed a failure. See, those deep ocean searches failed because the 7th arc is just littered with massive underwater volcanoes and cliffs. It's a completely hostile environment down there. But the ocean couldn't keep all its secrets. In July 2015, the very first piece of physical evidence, a flaperon, actually washed up on Reunion Island near Madagascar. Since then, 27 pieces of debris have been found globally. And when scientists did an ocean drift analysis, it confirmed that those specific pieces of debris traveled on ocean currents that traced perfectly back to the 7th arc. So the math was right. The plane was there. They just couldn't see it under the water. Which brings us to a really massive breakthrough in 2022. Retired aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey boldly came out and stated, "I have been tracking back through the data, and out of that tracking, MH370, I'm sure they will be able to find the aircraft." He made this incredible claim by combining the historical Boeing and satellite data with a totally new method of analyzing radio waves. Godfrey utilized something called WSPR-net. Basically, it's an amateur radio technology that relies on weak radio waves constantly being emitted and bouncing off the atmosphere all around the globe. The sheer genius of this is that when a large flying airplane passes through these weak radio signals, it disrupts them. It acts literally like an invisible tripwire in the sky. So Godfrey built a computer program to analyze historical radio disruptions from the exact night MH370 vanished, essentially mapping the plane's exact route through these invisible tripwires. And his conclusions? They are absolutely stunning. Godfrey's calculations place MH370 exactly on a highly specific point of the 7th arc. The new radio wave data perfectly overlays with the original satellite handshake math. He asserts the plane is sitting right where the math predicted, hiding approximately 4 kilometers deep underwater, in a zone full of underwater cliffs that previous searchers, even a highly advanced scan by the company Ocean Infinity, narrowly missed or just failed to fully decipher. 40. This is the absolute most crucial number for the future of this mystery. Thanks to Godfrey's combined data from the 7th arc and WSPR-net, the search area has dramatically shrunk from the vast, impossible expanse of the southern Indian Ocean down to a highly targeted 40 nautical mile radius. That is incredibly small compared to the millions of square miles they were hopelessly looking at back in 2014. Which leaves us with this final thought. If the data is correct, if the faint satellite handshakes and the disrupted radio waves all perfectly converge at this single point on the 7th arc, is the world's biggest aviation mystery finally about to be solved? With a hyper-specific target of just 40 nautical miles, a new search could actually bring closure to the 239 families who have been waiting for answers for so long. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. The data is out there, the math has been done, and perhaps very soon, the ocean will finally give up its ghost. Until next time,